My name is Antonio Elias Lopez, and I am 60 years old, and I was born and raised in Dallas, Texas, in inner city Dallas, Texas.
What brought you to El Paso?
Well, in retrospect, as I think about it, I think that it had a lot to do with my studies and because I am a Chicano. As a Chicano, I have always been in search of land and space and home. And as far as my studies, I was studying Chicano studies and Mexican American studies at UT Austin. And so when my sister decided to finish her degree here at UTEP, I followed her at that time. But I think that, like I say, now that I look back on it, I think it was the universe kind of like interceding and helping me to find that land, that place, and that connection to Chicano studies, my life, and what I was searching for.
When was this when you came to El Paso?
Oh, this was in 1986. I came here in 1986, and the first time I came, I stayed until 1981.
Here meaning?
Oh, to El Paso. I'm sorry. I first came to El Paso in 1986 and stayed until 1991.
What keeps bringing you back to El Paso?
Well, it's a lot of things bring me back, but one of the things that I think really ignited me when I first came to El Paso was the fact that I could speak my language, and I didn't even know my language then that well. I could speak Spanish 24 hours a day. And the food, every place I went was our traditional and our native foods, our indigenous foods. And also the fact that I am a queer man of color, and all of the struggles that I was going through in all of the big Texas cities, especially in Austin, as a queer Chicano man. And I come here and I go to the places that we gather, for instance, like the gay bars, and I walk in and it's like, it's all Mexicano men. It's all men of color. And I realized that I no longer had the same battle that I had on that level. I didn't have to deal with that here. So it's always been a conscious decision to return to El Paso, and a conscious decision to return to the Frontera and to return to downtown El Paso, the most historical part of El Paso, where I feel a sense of connection to history and to food and to the elders and to children and to the river and to what's happening in terms of Ciudad Juarez, and that we are one city. All of those things make it a very conscious choice to live in El Paso and to live in downtown El Paso.
When you first came to El Paso in the early 80s, your first job was in relation to food, catering, at UTEP. Can you tell us more about that?
Certainly. When I got here, it's just like any, I was following my family, my sister, and so when I came here, I was sitting in one of my comadre's office, who's a professor at UTEP, and one of a graduate students said, "Oh, well, you know what? My mom's the director of catering. Go over and talk to her. Maybe she has a job." And so I went over, talked to her. That same day, I arrived from Greyhound bus to UTEP to this office, and that day I was hired as a cook. Now, I had been cooking for a while, my way through college, but I was not a cook. I was more of a food service worker, no? And so they said, "Okay, Antonio's chef Gomia, Lorraine Gomia, a wonderful woman, was the chef and the director. She said, "Okay, Antonio, help me here in the kitchen." Halfway through my shift, she took me to the ballroom over where they do the dinner theater, and she showed me a place setting, and she said, "We're going to have a dinner for 200 people. This is your crew. Set it up." And it just came naturally to me to know what to do in terms of organizing that type of a setup. By the next week, I was the catering manager, and my job was to stage events. So by staging events, going in, meeting with clients, seeing what the theme was at that time. But you know, what I think more about at that time was my connection, our connection, our relationship with the president's office. Because Dr. Natalicio had just arrived to the university, first woman president in the UT system, which to me was like a very big deal, no? And I felt a lot of orgullo, pride, in being in that role. And so we began a relationship with Dr. Natalicio, and this was pre-Sodexo. This was the director of Lorengo Mia, chef director, and myself. We were running the food service catering, no? And so we would have these conversations. There was no middle person. Antonio, we're going to have a pre-game dinner, a pre-game luncheon at the Hoover House, where Dr. Natalicio's residence. And there's going to be 150 people. Here's the menu. Figure out a beautiful setup. And so I would be creative and do those types of things. Dinners for 100, receptions for 300, dinner theater for 200. We also had contracts where we were feeding the athletes. So people were sending us items from across Texas. At one time we would get big sides of beef that were donated, or we would get Texas wines that were donated, which would then be taken to different events for the university. So I think it fed into a lot of things in terms of what I was doing and what I wanted to do. As a queer man, what we do, one of our gifts is that we create beauty. We are the people who are the fashion designers. We are the people who are the florists. We are the people who are the cooks. We are the decorators. And so I think inherently it was just, it was something that I could do and that I could enjoy, and that just brought a lot of beauty to the catering department, and I enjoyed it a lot.
Can you talk to us a little bit about your journey of becoming a cook?
I know exactly when I became a cook. I became a cook at Alma de Mujer Center for Social Change, Retreat and Conference Center in Austin, Texas. And I had been working at that time. This was in '91, and I left El Paso, and I went back to Austin, and actually I became a health educator. This was the AIDS crisis, and the HIV crisis was still very, very rampant in our community. And a former organization that I had helped founded, the Austin Latino, Latina, Gay, and Lesbian Organization, had opened a clinic a while back called Informecida. And so I became a Latino gay health educator for Latino men who identify as queer and those who don't identify. So I was doing this work with people that were dying, people that were living but had a very grim view of their future. And it was very pesado, it was very heavy on me, no? And I had to organize. One of the things I did, I was there for several years. One of the things I did was I had to organize a retreat, so for the clients. So I said, I don't want to do this retreat. Because it's such a heavy topics, no? And I said, let's let the students or let's let the clients do the retreat, and I'll cook. And so at Alma de Mujer, I got into their kitchen, and we were there for 3 days. I cooked breakfast, lunch, and dinner for the gay men that were there, and I pretty much stayed in the kitchen. Well, at the end, and it was a success, you know. I mean, I really enjoyed it, and also the event itself, the conference, the weekend. And we're talking about a retreat center that is 27 acres in the hill country outside of Austin, near the lake, with Cypress Creek running through it, with a garden, with an artist area, with cabins and housing for 40 people. Well, at the end of this event, the director, my dear friend and dear sister, in paz descanse, Marcia Gomez, said, Antonio, why don't you come cook for me on the weekends? I said, yeah, for sure, I'll come cook for you on the weekends. In this beautiful space, cooking from the garden, you know, being able to cook on land, being able to cook in this beautiful space for people who were coming to have an experience, no? Not just coming to do work. And these are Native American women. These are Chicana Native American women, indigenous women. And they were also lesbian. The majority were, no? And so immediately there was a connection of familia and cooking and land and garden. And so 1 week led to 2 weeks to 3 weeks, and within 3 months at the most, I was living on that land. I was given a small cabin, and I became their food service titles. You know, actually I was their cook. I directed the kitchen, I worked the garden, I worked the land, I cleaned the land, I cleaned the cabins. We were all very much invested in this project. And it was there that I brought my mother's recipes, that I brought indigenous recipes, because we were cooking vegetarian. That was the only stipulation, was that we cook vegetarian. And that we use indigenous models within our food preparation and within the menu itself. So little by little, I started cooking. You know, and it's a lot. 40 people, 50 people, breakfast, lunch, and dinner for 4 days. Sometimes our groups would stay a week. And so to come up with the menus and to implement the menus, purchase, and to actually serve a buffet gave me a lot of experience. And when I left Alma de Mujer in '98, I was a cook.
Can you mention some of the recipes of your mother?
Well, you know, I don't really, you know, I say my mother, but maybe I should rephrase that and say, you know, our ancestral mothers. Because I pulled from my experience as a Chicano and what I ate in my youth in Dallas, and I also pulled from the very traditional Mexicano food. And then I pulled from the native women who were on the land and their traditions, no? So for instance, we had Winona LaDuke from White Earth was on our board, and she would always bring wild rice that was grown on her land at White Earth. And we had another sister who was from an area where they did a lot of, where they would catch and smoke salmon. So they would bring salmon packaged. And so from that I would create a menu, no? As far as my own personal, from my family, I did a lot of chalupas. I did a lot of enchiladas. I did a lot of red sauces, green sauces, ¿no? De los chiles, salsa que aquí le llaman colorado. Bueno, yo lo conozco like chile rojo, ¿no? A lot of fruit. And in terms of experimenting with other recipes, well, we would do a lot of contemporary things, flatbreads with vegetables, a lot of Italian as well, a lot of pastas. But all of this had to have a connection with what we were growing in our gardens, the herbs that we were using, and also looking at the group who was coming. What were their needs nutritionally? What were they going to be focusing on during their gathering? You know, was it purely business, or was this a spiritual gathering? Was this a gathering that was focused around Earth, Mother Earth, and the elements of the universe, which would be our spiritual gatherings? So then the menus would change in terms of who the group was.
Can you tell us a little bit about your responsibilities in Alma de Mujer?
I had many responsibilities at Alma de Mujer, and I wore many different hats at Alma de Mujer. And it was, and they were all directed in a very wise way by my sister, and who was also my employer, no? Marcia Gomez, a Choctaw Chicana. And she would get me to do things, you know, she would say, okay, Antonio, you know, go out and clear the land, go out and and what she meant was like pick up little sticks and clear the wood that had fallen from the trees, and in the garden go and weed. But she had a very specific way of doing it. At the beginning, she would say, okay, that's the catalpa tree. All of the pods and all of the pieces of bark that have fallen from the catalpa, put them in one pile. And that's the cedar. The cedar, do the same thing. Put them all in one pile. And so what she was doing was having me clear the land by families of trees, no? And then she would taught me about kindling, and she taught me about hardwood and softwood in that way. Take all of these and put them on the front porch in familia, in piles of families, no? Of the trees. And from there it would be like, okay, and it wasn't like explaining, it was during the seasons. During the winter, I began to know what wood burnt best in the cabins, what wood, or in the main lodge, you know? What wood I should use if we want to build a fire outside, what kindling is, you know, which one is good for this. So I began to build a relationship through my work and through this very wise direction of my sister Marcia with the land and the trees and fire. And then I started to realize that there was also a big connection with me as a cook and fire. As the years passed, one day my sister came to me and she said, we're going to have a temazcal tonight, which is a sweat lodge, And it was a women's land, so of course it was women's sweat lodge. And my responsibility during the sweat lodge was to receive the food at the kitchen that the participants brought to end the fast that they were on for the entire day until the sweat lodge or the temazcal was over. And I'd sit on my porch, and when I would hear the last drumming or the last songs coming from the temazcal area down near the pond, then I would go to the kitchen and I would start setting up the buffet, no? Burn a little copal, say a prayer for the food, and set out the buffet. And when they arrived, I would quietly leave and go back to my cabin, no? And this was a form of respect. It was not a form of not being included. This was a women's space, and I was there because I was queer man, and because I could easily maneuver in and out, no? But at one point, the firekeeper didn't show up or couldn't show up, and my sister Marcia, she said, okay, Antonio, you're going to be firekeeper. And I was like, no, I can't be firekeeper. I don't know. Yes, you can be firekeeper. You know the wood. You know the families of the wood. You've been working with them for a couple of years now, and you know the songs, and you know how to build a fire, and you respect the land, so you're going to be our firekeeper. And I think it was at that point, after I started claiming my responsibility and my place around the fire, around the sacred fire, and started seeing fire in its relationship as ceremony, that it began to make that connection to me of my role as a cook and the elements that I was working with. And I realized that I was working with some very powerful elements: fire, water, earth, wind, and time. And these were the things that started to define me spiritually and pushed me more into being a cook, the type of cook that I wanted to be.
Need a minute?
No, I'm good.
Tell us about this type of cook in terms of ancestral food. What does that mean?
Well, I think that it connects, for me, it connects right there at that point. Well, ancestral food, what is ancestral food to me has so many different layers, but yet it's so simple and so profound at the same time. As the ancestral food begins with working and acknowledging your relationship with fire and wind and earth and water and time. Time is very important because time speaks to our inability to slow down and our inability to cook what we do is we cook from cans and from plastic, and we punch a button in our microonde, in our microwave, and automatically. And so we have no relationship with food. Time is very important in cooking, no? And working in the industry, we're also pushed for time. We work in an industry that is like, it should take you 3 minutes to do that task. When that ticket comes in, you got 7 minutes to push it out. And you're working on 5, 6, 7 tickets at a time. And no ticket, no client should be waiting more than 7 minutes. And that's even an extreme. It's more like 4 minutes, 5 minutes at the most. So time. We're constantly rushed to prepare our food, no? And what respect is that to the food that we're preparing, to the people that we're nourishing? So when I think about ancestral food, I think about our relationship with the elements. I think about our respect in the preparation of the food. And I also think about, who we're feeding and why we're feeding. What energy I, as a cook, what energy am I putting into this food for this particular meal or for this particular gathering? Indigenous food, looking, or rather reclaiming our ancestral food. The maize, the corn, the bean, the squash, the chile, the amaranto, the nopal. All of these are our ancestral foods. And now at this point in my career, if I'm asked to cook and to create a menu, it's from this canasta, from this ancestral basket of foods that I choose to cook from. And of course, constantly listening to our elders and listening to the señoras in the barrios, listening to the abuelas in the barrios, and listening to our inherent, to that ancestral voice within us, no? That is our tatabuela, that is our great-great-grandmother speaking to us about how to prepare food and what to do. And it's interesting because I think that we all have that voice. Sometimes I'm in the kitchen and I don't know what to do. And is it my experience as a cook? Or is it that voice that tells me what to do? To me, that's ancestral cooking, and that's connecting me to my ancestral foods and ancestral techniques of cooking.
What are some of those techniques?
The techniques that I use a lot is the molcajete. I can make a pudding, and I can make a salsa in a molcajete, no? And because it's about technique, no? So the comal, the parrilla, the comal is the, I forget what it's called in English. But anyway, the comal, where we make our tortillas, where we heat up our food, no? Also the parrilla, what we use to grill on, no? Because all of these, what we do is we char, we burn, we smother, we do all of these things with fire. And so these are our tools that we use, no? Just direct fire, a lot of times direct fire is what we need to bring out those flavors that we that we are so accustomed to, no? Or that we find joy in, no? A lot of outside cooking as well. If I can cook on an outside fire, that food is going to be tremendous, because it's like all of the elements are involved. There's no way it's not going to be tremendous.
You're talking about the voice, these voices that we have, and you also do pláticas. Can you tell us a little bit about these pláticas, how they started, what are you doing, what do they mean?
I think the pláticas started way back in the late 90s when I was at Alma de Mujer, and many of our projects were around working with youth, working with mothers, connecting them to inner city Chicanos, Mexicanos, Latinos, coming back and reclaiming their place with land, no? Their relationship with land. And so we would have to do platicas when they would come to the land and tell them about what we were doing. But it was actually through an organization that we formed called Project Chico Mecoat back in, gosh, it must have been around little after 2000. And this was a project that was devoted to nutrition and taking an indigenous model around nutrition. It never really flew, this organization. It never really got off the ground. However, years later, I asked one of my comadres who had started the Project Chico Mecoat, can I take it over? Because you know what, this is perfect. If I could use the name and use it as a starting point for the platicas that I want to do around ancestral food in urban settings. And it's about using ancestral food or acknowledging ancestral food, using ancestral recipes in urban settings and urban cocinas. And so I began just giving small presentations around a concept that another professor formulated, which was the Siete Guerreros. And so the 7 indigenous foods that we continue to eat today, but that have sustained our people for thousands and thousands of years. The corn, the frijol, the calabaza, the squash, the amaranto, the chile, the maguey, and the nopal. Those are the foods that have nourished our people and that we continue to use. So from that point, I was able to create menus and to go out and talk to community. However, you know, it's always been grassroots community. It's my vecinos who I see in the stores with their shopping carts full of plastic and full of a food model that has been proven that kills our people. The United States of America and the Western world will go down in history as perhaps the only time in history that they have developed a nutritional model that kills their people and that takes them away from the earth. And so as I saw this in my community for many, many years, you know, it would just, I thought, well, you know what? I'm just going to go ask if I can do a plática at this community center. Or I was asked by a mujer obrera, and that really got me going and doing presentations here on the frontera. And so it developed. First they wanted to know about nutrition. Well, I'm not a nutritionist, but I'm a cocinero. So I can talk about the foods and I can show you how to cook them, and we can make some samples and we can enjoy them, and we can talk about your abuela's recetas, we can talk about your mother's recetas, we can talk about what you remember about these foods. What does it feel like to you when you make the enchiladas? What about, do you have time to make frijol? Do you know how to make frijol? Are you teaching your children how to, you know, spend time with food and cooking? So these were the questions that I would throw out there, and that brought all of these responses around nutrition and around food, and then it led to gardens, no? And reclaiming our gardens, reclaiming our foods as we started to embrace our community gardens more. That became a part of the conversation. So Project Chico Mecoat continues to evolve as the community evolves. As if they ask me to go someplace and do a presentation, I will bring the Siete Guerreros, and we work together, the Siete Guerreros and myself, to educate the community and on these foods, and try to make some kind of connection, no? And it's different groups. Sometimes it's around the garden, sometimes it's in a school, sometimes it's at UTEP, sometimes it's for groups that are dealing with specific kind of health issues. I go wherever I'm invited. So it's been an interesting journey here on the frontera, here in El Paso, over 20 plus years of cooking, where I began cooking very, very traditional, you know, European menus. And now I find myself in restaurants that are reclaiming our foods of the frontera, specifically of the frontera, and also our indigenous foods. No, we're seeing people who are working, who are opening Mexican vegetarian restaurants, chefs who are Mexicanos who are opening vegan restaurants, and reaching into the ancestral canasta of nourishment and creating menus from that. And that's where I sit today. Right now, for the past, I'd say 5 years, I've been working off and on with different cocinas, with different kitchens and chefs that are taking this approach. Hello Day was perhaps one of the first ones. Hello Day, 6 blocks from the frontera on El Paso Street, which all of those things are important to me. No, place is very important to me in terms of cooking. So that was one of the first places where my job was to be their prep cook. And so I made all of their sauces and all of their, everything that was going to be used in bulk, no? And a lot of our traditional foods were in those recipes. However, that was one of the first vegetarian and vegan restaurants in El Paso. Now, we're talking 5 years later, I'm working for a chef who is from the frontera, from El Paso, and is incorporating, I would say, at least 50, if not more % of our indigenous foods. And he doesn't, the name of this restaurant is One Grub Community. And it's also a very wonderful concept because we're located within a church. We also work from a garden which is in place there. We have a garden right outside the kitchen. We have a project that is pay forward, and also no one who comes in and is hungry is turned away. And so this falls right into the type of model that of Alma de Mujer, of Casa de Colores, of working in ceremonial places, creating food for me, and it falls right into place with also the concept of what it is to be a vegan, what it is to cook vegan food, to cook plant-based food, that everything in that kitchen is plant-based, earth-based, Mother Earth-based, Madre Tierra-based, spiritually based, using all of the elements. So I think it's really wonderful, for me, for me it's wonderful, to be part of this evolution in El Paso of still working from our ancestral gardens and our ancestral recetas, but now seeing these young Chicanos, young Mexicanos, taking our food to another level, but still being very, very connected to the raíz, to the root, and to the spirit, and to the ancestors of our food, It's a very wonderful thing to see on the frontera because it's all about health, and it's all about progressing, and it's all about having respect for all of these things that I've mentioned.
Okay. Last question. What do you feel that food should mean to all of us?
Well, I think that what food should mean, it means something different to everyone. Food means something different. What I've noticed is that it means something different to everyone. I have comadres that to them it's about, hey man, I gotta feed my kids, because I gotta go to work, and you know what? It's like I'm not gonna be there all the time. So food is a different thing to that familia. To other people, what I've noticed when I was working with curanderas and parteras and hierberas, who were my original teachers at Alma de Mujer, it was all about food as medicina, food as a healing component, for our health. And if you have a lot of health issues, then food will take that role. Food should always be enjoyment. Food should always bring people together. And it does. It has that power of bringing us together. Food should always be enjoyed. And the cocinero must always prepare that food in a space of enjoyment and a space of recognizing the ingredients that they're working with and giving thanks for these ingredients. In the contemporary kitchens and the industry, there's no time for that. But within these kitchens that I've been very, very fortunate to work in, we do have time to acknowledge what ingredients we're using, no? And giving thanks for these ingredients. When you work from the garden and when you work with the elements, the water and fire and time, and you're given the amount of time to prepare the food correctly, and then it's a very, very beautiful thing as a cook not to do this. And I encourage people to look at food in that way and to start practicing things in their home, no? So food means something different to everybody, no?
Thank you so much.
Thank you.